Welcome to the Clegg YouTube channel, and today I'm really pleased that I've got Karl Gilligan on the show. How are you, Karl?
Nice to meet you, Mike.
So, I've known Karl now for probably about a year. We've been working on things, strength and conditioning. Karl has a very rich history in athletics, he has a rich history in rugby, and also he's now driving a really brilliant course through his institute called the Elite Performance Institute out from Ireland, but he actually coaches all over the world. So Karl, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So, you know, I always start at the start, and obviously you're an Irish guy, you was brought up in Sligo in Ireland, and what was it like to be brought up there, and when did you first find your love and your passion for all things athletic and sporty?
Yeah, so Sligo, west of Ireland, very rural. I would have been very young when my dad introduced me to sport. Quite a wide variety of sport, really. There was you've got an indigenous sport called Gaelic football in Ireland, so Gaelic football, rugby, tennis, swimming. So you could probably think I was a bit of a mongrel dog in many ways, because there wasn't just one sport. I was probably involved in 5 or 6 different sports, and I was kind of competitive, so always looking to try and compete in every single sport. And really then by the time I got to about 12, 14, I started to just filter down and play a bit more rugby and Gaelic football only. But then even up as far as under 21, I was playing rugby for my province in Connacht, and then the next day then playing a county semi-final, you know, for my club team in senior level in Gaelic football. So definitely not how you would do it today, playing 2 games in 2 days, but back then it still seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, I think back then, I mean, you're not very old now, probably similar age to myself, so you're still a young lad, but we played all sports, didn't we? It was a part of our upbringing. It was a part of, you know, if you wanted to learn swimming, it was football, GAA for yourself. You know, it was good to get these multidisciplinary type of exercises and differentials of sport, because ultimately that helps further down the road.
Definitely. For me and my coaching, there's one thing I say to all the participants on the course is that you have to be a good demonstrator. So that comes from having good movement skills. And one of the downsides for me for, I suppose, playing so many sports was that I didn't specialise maybe early enough to try and attain the top level goals I would have wanted in that sport, in this case rugby. But it definitely helped me in my coaching, because it's given me this broad range of skills whereby I can now be a very good mover, a very good demonstrator, to all the participants on the course, and they recognise that as now one of the fundamentals of good coaching.
Yeah, like you say, it's great to have all these assets for yourself, but you wanted to be a rugby player, I suppose, and you tried to follow that dream, and it brought you over to England, and you studied at St Mary's down in London, and you played for London Irish there. Yeah,
so I would have gone to Sligo Grammar School, which is a rugby playing school, and that's where I would have focused a little bit more on rugby, and then from Sligo Grammar in Sligo then over to St Mary's in London. So I did my sports science degree in London, St Mary's, and during that time I also then played with London Irish. There was a great coach there, an Irish guy, former Irish rugby player, Willie Anderson. So he was the head coach there, and during that time the Irish centralised system of contracting players wasn't in place. So therefore a lot of Irish players were actually going abroad to try and get better contracts for themselves. Professionalism had really only kicked off a couple of years at this point, so England were at the forefront of professionalism, so therefore they were offering better contracts for players. So at that time in London Irish there was at least maybe half a dozen to about 10 different Irish international players who were there. So Malcolm O'Kelly, David Humphreys, Gary Halpin, all those guys were there at the time, and I was just a young kid coming in at the under-19s level. I then made it into the development squad and then played a few games then with the seconds, and Willie at the time said, listen, come back next year a little bit bigger and stronger. I was still playing Gaelic football, so at that time Gaelic football would run you hard, you'd lose a lot of weight, you get kind of skinny and fit, and then rugby then you try to put on a bit of size. And so I went back to my province, played the inter-provincials for my province, and had a great summer. Came back to London Irish then the next year, and Dick Best came in, and he demanded everyone to have contracts. So unless you had a contract during that time, then it was okay, the door was shut and you're making it into the first team. So
okay, so that was a tough time for you then, I imagine.
It was, yeah. So I went back then playing Gaelic football, you know, for the university. My county team, Sligo, also, you know, county football in Ireland is quite big, so they were willing to fly me over from London for games and everything. So
oh really? So that was a regular thing when you used to
yeah, I was flying. I felt great because I was getting a flight from London to Dublin, straight into Sligo airport, play the game, see my family, fly back then, you know.
So superstar status.
Well, at the time it felt like that, but it was good fun. It was good fun at the same time.
Good. So I imagine then you've done your sports science degree. You really feeling that you might go into coaching? Is that where you first got a passion for coaching, or were you still a bit unsure then?
When I left St Mary's in 2000 after doing the sports science degree, I was still a little bit unsure, you know, at that time, sports science, where it was going to take you, possibly working in a lab, you know, but that didn't really kind of captivate, I suppose, me as a coach or as an individual. So the best thing I actually did then was, and my dad suggested it, was to go play rugby for a year, get an overseas experience, go to the Southern Hemisphere. So I had two options. I was speaking with coaches in University of Queensland and then also Otago. So I spoke with the coach in Otago, and Otago at the time had an international Jeff Wilson, so they were a big, you know, team at the time. And the only options for me to work there for the year was fruit picking. And I thought he was joking when I spoke with him at the time. I said, "You're joking, right? What about a bar work?" And he was like, "No, I'm not going to give you bar work. You're a foreigner. We give those jobs to our locals."
Really?
So
that's hard graft, eh?
It was. So I looked at fruit picking as an option, and even though you would have played with a great team like Otago, I decided to go to Australia, where the options would have been better. And very good club, University of Queensland in Brisbane. It was Michael Lina, who's a former international player. It was his old club, and it was great weather, great training environment, facilities were amazing. Wake up every morning 5:30, you know, you're in the gym by 6:30, you know, having your second breakfast by about 8 o'clock, and then you'd relax, do a bit of kicking practice then by 11. Then you have training that evening, or you do a bit of work on the sprint track, you know, to do with sprinting or some intervals. So yeah, it was a fantastic year.
I suppose at that age, it's every young lad's dream, I suppose, you know, to be out there doing that, looking after the body, feeling good about yourself in the nice weather.
It was amazing, yeah. I was only 21 at the time, and I suppose it got me back into rugby, because for the final 2 years I would have focused on Gaelic football. So after having such, I suppose, great progress in rugby, you know, right up as far as that year with London Irish, and then that finishing, then to go back to Gaelic football. I knew rugby was the sport I really wanted to play, so had a great year playing with a very good team. Nathan Sharp at the time was a young international for Australia, so he was playing at our club. So it was great to play alongside him, and then from there I went back to Limerick. So my dad got me a rugby scholarship, essentially, because my goal was to stay in Australia, but he had other ideas. So he said, I've spoken with a club in Limerick, and we've arranged for a rugby scholarship for you to go back to UL to do a postgrad.
So even though 12,000 miles away, still sort of dictating what you're doing.
He was, yeah. So he had his plan, you know. So I just went along with it, really. Even though I put up a little bit of resistance to try and stay in Australia, I think it was the best choice.
So you come back over to Ireland, you're playing rugby again now, and obviously I imagine, but maybe I'm wrong, you continued with your sports science education. Yeah,
it was that time. So there was essentially a UL Bows Academy. Now I would have been a few years older than the other guys. A lot of those guys who entered into that academy were just first year in college. So I was a bit more of, like, I suppose, the father figure for them in the house. And they had a great gym there. They wanted a strength and conditioning coach. So I was playing with the club, and I said, listen, I'll do the strength and conditioning. So I'll look after the guys, their programs and everything. So there was a manager who was over, we'll say, the academy, but he didn't have any specialized skills for strength and conditioning. He was a rugby coach, essentially. So I did the strength and conditioning. We went in and, you know, did all the strength, power work, the speed work, the fitness with the players, and that's what really, I suppose, you know, got me my first job as a strength and conditioning coach. Australia opened my eyes to what strength and conditioning was. There was a really good guy there, a guy called Vince Kelly, who opened my eyes to what strength and conditioning is, and then it was probably really after that year I said, right, I want to be a strength and conditioning coach.
So even though you're doing your sports science degree at St Mary's, went to Australia, but that sort of applied knowledge, seeing it happening week in, week out within the team, that's what made you think, I'll tell you what, maybe my passion, if I can't become a rugby player professional, it might be more in the sort of strength and conditioning element.
Definitely, and you know, London Irish was professional at the time, but it was very amateur in many ways. And on the flip side of that, University of Queensland, the first team, the Premier team, you know, they were amateur, but they were very professional. So some of the athletes there were unbelievable. You know, they were hugely strong, powerful, fast guys. And then we had a very good strength and conditioning coach who was able to write all excellent programs. So it was really from that year then that when I moved back to Ireland, I thought, right, I want to be, or at least working as a strength and conditioning coach to see is that the area that I want to work in. My dad had enrolled me at the time in a postgrad in IT because IT was booming in Ireland. He said, there's nothing in sports science for you in Ireland, but you're coming back to Ireland, but you're going to do a postgrad in IT. So I went along with it because it got me a rugby scholarship, and I also thought maybe I could go professional in rugby, and played for a year. You know, you're playing in the IL in the first divisions, which is, I suppose, the feeder for Munster as the professional team. And you know, I spoke with Munster a few times, and they decided that I needed to play another year before they'd offer a contract. So I was fortunate that during that time, the IRFU, which is the Irish Rugby Football Union, they were creating a strength and conditioning course, or what was called a certified conditioning coach course. And the guy who was involved in putting it together, he actually went to St. Mary's as well. That's how I met him in the gym. As it transpires, he had a bad back where he was wearing a back harness. His boss at the time, you know, in the IRFU wanted him to create the manual, which involved him having to demonstrate all the exercise, which he couldn't do. So he asked me, listen, Karl, I saw you in the gym for the last, you know, few weeks. You do all your clean snatches, your squats, everything great. Would you mind helping me out with this manual? I said, no problem. So I did all the snaps, all the pictures for all the exercises and everything, and he obviously showed them to his boss, and then from there his boss was, you know, obviously happy with how I was demonstrating the exercises, and then he spoke with me about coming on board working for the IRFU just on the back of that.
It's interesting with you know, the work you put yourself forward to be the sports scientist, strength and conditioning coach for your actual rugby team, but also being in that environment where you was willing to put yourself forward again to do all the demonstrations. And I've seen you demonstrate, you're excellent at that. And I suppose back then, 2000, 2001, strength and conditioning sports science was a bit like the Wild West. You know, there was no real organisations or authorities apart from maybe the NSCA out in America where things were stabilised. So you knew, you had the chartered physiotherapist, or you know, whatever it might be in other industries, but it was a bit like the Wild West, wasn't it? Oh,
very much. It was a lot of trial and error. Like it's probably a long time ago for some of our younger listeners, but back then I don't remember ever YouTube or anything like that as a resource just to go on and just see some live footage of, you know, maybe some strength power sessions if I wanted to see them in real life, if I couldn't actually see them, you know, by a team or anything like that. So you did have to, you know, trial things to see how they went. Were they, you know, did they respond well with the players? Were they effective in how, you know, the session transpired? And then from there, you know, you're learning as you go along. I always say to the guys in my courses that you're in a very fortunate position that some of you, could be physios or personal trainers, but you're now actually getting a course which is teaching you best practice. I didn't have that when I started. I had to make a lot of mistakes before actually, you know, things clicked and I got it right. So back in 2000, 2001, everything, very much like the Wild West.
So within that segment of time, you worked for the IRFU, and you sort of stabilised yourself. You started working with different teams, with different organisations within that institute. And you know, tell us some of the stories there. Because how long was you there for? Yeah,
so I would have then moved to Dublin in 2003 to work for the IRFU, and originally that involved managing a movement skill development program, which was in conjunction with the main healthcare provider VHI. And during that time, again, I suppose PE in Ireland was a bit like the Wild West, where there was no curriculum. There's only really now they're looking to bring in a curriculum, but essentially PE would have mainly involved just giving the kids a ball and let them play.
I remember my PE, you know, it was bat and ball, it was a game of football. If you wasn't very good, you hardly got a touch.
Could have been cricket on another day, you know.
Running around the you know, that cross-country running, which was like torture, and there's a lot of people who stepped away from wanting to do physical education. And
well, the running would have been a bit more straightforward, but imagine some of those kids that they weren't very good at playing, you know, whether whether it was soccer or rugby or Gaelic football, whatever it was. So a lot of them would just opt out, and essentially they opted out mainly because they didn't actually have the physical literacy to be good at the game. They didn't have the movement skills. So instead of being made fun of, they just opt out as an easy option. So this whole program was around trying to build up the fundamental movement skills in the kids, and it was a 6-week program whereby sessions were laid out for the teachers. But before we go in, and then at the end we go and do a little bit of testing. So we look at height and weight for BMI, and then also flexibility with a sit and reach test, and then vertical power, which is a great way of profiling kids, for, I suppose, for power for sport, with the CMJ test. And some alarming statistics, some exciting ones at the same time. Some of the exciting ones was that I remember a child in Dublin, and he was only 10 years of age, and he jumped 64 centimetres on the CMJ test.
Wow,
which
that's incredibly high.
Enormously high. So which it was like levitating off the ground essentially. And I suppose most Premier League football players, at the moment, they wouldn't, or Premiership football players wouldn't even be able to attain that. So it shows where his leg power. And that child was pure genetics, because I asked him, "Are you involved in an athletics club?" No. "Were you involved in a football team?" No. So really just down to great genes from his parents.
And would somebody like him, would you try and encourage him to go to a sports club
that
or
was
go
it.
to an athletics track?
Definitely, yeah. I suppose it opened your eyes as to where profiling like that can now go and I suppose prepare kids for certain positions. On if it was rugby, for example, what position and you might be better suited to, but also if you have the attributes, the physical attributes for, we'll say, power-based sports. Some other ones were a bit more alarming in that there was the heaviest boy was 118 kilograms, 10 years of age. Heaviest girl 108.5 kilograms. So again, the whole area around good nutrition and understanding of nutrition and diet played another important part of the program.
Which is a shame, and these kids obviously get obesity at a very young age. It sets them up for a lifetime of probably anguish, and education to the parents is so important, unless that is they become like sumo wrestlers, which I don't think is popular in Ireland, is it?
No, we don't have too many of those type of sports. So I think a lot of it was just going to be down to education. So the program was very much trying to, I suppose, educate the kids on having good movement skills, bringing in stretching, bringing in a little core work. So there's a little bit of supplemental exercises for them to do. We had an Irish rugby player who was like a star at that time, Brian O'Driscoll. So it was a lot around kind of what does Brian eat, what does Brian do in terms of his stretching and his core exercises, and a lot of kids just wanted to emulate their heroes.
Which is great, and that's why past athletes or past stars, for them to give back to their schools, give back to the education system, is always a great thing to do. And for the children to look up to him, and use him as an example of how to get fitter, is always brilliant. And I like to do that myself at the moment. I go and speak in some schools, and I think it's important to give back. And Brian did a great job there, I imagine. It's something that the kids can really grab hold of. Yeah,
very much so. Like, he would have been their idol, so straight away, there was a strong connection, a bit of relativity for the kids, and as a result of that, they were able to take some of those important messages and apply them themselves and build a routine around that, build a routine around good nutrition and also good movement skills. But during that time as well, I was also involved in the Leinster Sub-Academy, the Academy, the age grades teams, the Irish 19s. There was a very good team. Cian Healy still playing today, Keith Earl still playing today. They were under 19, at a World Cup, and helping them over the World Cup. We had a great tournament over there. We beat England along the way, so that was always nice to get one over on the old enemies. So so it was those 4 years were a great starting point for me. But I always had an ambition to work with Olympic athletes. My first memory, showing my age now, but my first memory of the Olympics was '88 with Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson, and that was a huge spectacle event. Probably one of the biggest sporting events outside of Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. So it was that time then that I said, right, it'd be great to actually work with some athletes that are going to the Olympics. And the Irish Institute of Sport was just being formulated at the time. We had Professor Greg White, who came over from the UK, who was the Director of Sports Science, and he was centrally involved in setting up the Institute. And I became the first accredited strength and conditioning coach through the Institute system for accrediting different service providers like exercise physiologists, nutritionists, sports psychologists. And really based on that, he then asked me then to go for the deputy director role, which was a great, I suppose, honour to be asked, but I had my own goals as well outside of maybe working with the institute and working with the athletes. I was thinking about at that time setting up my own performance gym and then also my own courses.
Which we're going to speak about in a minute, but within that segment of time you was not lucky enough, but you was fortunate enough to be a part of a career of a young canoeist who went to 2 Olympics, and you went with him, didn't you? So tell us about Owen.
Yeah, so his name was Owen Reinish. He was a whitewater canoeist. The Institute essentially asked me to become the sports science coordinator for the Irish Canoe Union, both for the flat and also the whitewater. We didn't have many canoeists, in Ireland, and so it was important that we tried to work with the elite ones that we had. And Owen Reinish was a standout, athlete at the time. Which really made him a standout athlete is that there's no whitewater facility in Ireland.
Wow.
And there he is with trying to compete with some of the best athletes in the world.
So not that how do you manage to even train him properly?
He had to travel, so he was traveling for over 250 days of the year to different countries in order to be able to train at their facilities so that he could get enough whitewater practice. When you think about it, Slovenia, canoeing is one of the national sports.
Really? Okay.
So, there was a very good athlete around that time, a guy called Kaiser. He was a fantastic, canoeist, and he was trying to compete with a guy who could get whitewater every single day if he wanted to.
Yeah.
So Owen was enormously driven, probably one of the most driven athletes I've ever seen, because he was able to organise everything for himself. You go into a Leinster Rugby and a team-based sport, everything is essentially put on a plate for them. The minute they walk in the door, they sometimes just have to bring their boots and their wash bag, and that's it. Whereas Owen, he had to manage his own high-performance program, and as a result, it probably made him more self-driven and motivated. And to work alongside him, to go to the Beijing Games with him, and also then he was involved in the London Games in 2012 as well. So 2004 in Athens, he didn't even make the semi-final, the quarter-final. He was out in the heat. Yeah. And in 2006 then, just as I was finishing work in Leinster Rugby, he asked me would I get involved with him, and I didn't know anything about canoeing, if I was honest, and it was funny because he said, "Karl, I'll be honest, I'm speaking with you and 2 other coaches." And I said, "Okay, and can I meet you this week?" And I said, "Listen, I don't know anything about canoeing, I'll be honest." I said, "It'd be much better if we get a conversation next week when I've done a bit of research." Sure. So I did my research on the sport and learned a lot more about it during that week, so I could have a proper conversation with him and actually tell him what I could do for him as a service provider. And I went and met him the following week, and during that time he met the other coaches, and I wasn't maybe overly impressed with them, and he then decided to work with me, and it was a great relationship with him then for 6 years, and he got to the final in Beijing. He was actually sitting in gold medal place with 3 canoeists to go.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. And unfortunately then the 3 guys came down and pipped him, so he ended up in 4th place.
So that just shows a good progression of his career. He didn't get a medal, but ultimately working with a good strength and conditioning coach, probably working on some aspects of his training he's never done before, helped him to get to a level. I bet he's very proud of his 4th place, and in yourself, in your relationship, I imagine is still going strong. Yeah,
I still keep in touch with Owen. He's now involved in the Irish Institute of Sport. He's involved as a performance coach and a lifestyle coach for a lot of the athletes, where they're trying to get the balance right between, could be university, their actual sporting career, and then also life balance as well outside of that, trying to manage all those different variables.
I'm sure he's took many lessons from yourself, so you're allowing this to transcend down the different generations, so good to you.
Yeah, well, what was funny was actually I used to bring Owen in on the course at the end, on the final day of sometimes the phase 2 course, and he just talked to them about his experience of strength and conditioning and how important it was for him and his career. And Owen is a very smart guy, so I would have drip fed him a lot of information over an extended period of time. So a lot of the actual participants on the course thought he was a strength and conditioning coach as well. Really? Because of his knowledge. Yeah.
Excellent. So going to the course, the EPI, it's something, the Elite Performance Institute, it's a fantastic course. I've been on the courses. ultimately I started to doing a little bit of lecturing for you as well, and we've got some projects all across the world coming up quite soon. But you've been running this course how long now? 6-7 years?
Yeah, it was in 2011 that we first started running some workshops. 2010 really, I had a lot of sports science interns, just looking to attend sessions and come with me for a few weeks with different teams and so forth to gain a bit more understanding. And then one of them actually suggested, then would you think about running some workshops? So it was that time it got me thinking, a little bit more. So I decided to run the workshops and then formulate the course then into the national certificate in strength and conditioning, and that's what it's known today. So that would have been formulated 2012, and then the NCSC course is made up of a phase 1 course and a phase 2 course, followed then by a certification exam day, and it's really providing you with the fundamentals of strength and conditioning. So whether you're a personal trainer or a physiotherapist or a sports scientist, and you don't want to maybe go back and study for 4 years in order to get a degree in strength and conditioning, you're looking for a CPD course specifically in that area to give you those fundamentals, and that's what this course essentially does.
I like it. The actual course is a course, so you're learning on the course. It's not just an accreditation. Like I got my UKSCA from England, but that was just an accreditation. You have to do a lot of self-learning. You got the NSCA, which is out in America, which is just a course, but there's no practical side. So your course itself actually has the element of a phase 1, a phase 2, lots of learning in between, because you've got to be able to apply it. It's not just theoretical, like what you would get on a university course potentially for 2 or 3 years. So the course for me just brought a lot of things together, and even though I was working at Sunderland, I was very experienced, I took a lot from it, and it's something when we'd spoken after about getting involved, I was really quite happy to do so. And then I went out with you recently out to Poland, doing some lecturing with you, which was a great experience, and even from that, with yourself, there are different elements and different courses which you think could be really useful for practitioners all over the world, out in China, in Europe. So we're talking about potentially doing a soccer performance seminar, aren't we?
Yeah, so just to, I suppose, go back on the first point you mentioned there, Mike, we have different membership organisations which are great. They add accreditation, additional value for coaches. If we were to look at a similar discipline in physiotherapy, you have somebody enters into college and studies a degree in physiotherapy, and then from there they go on to their membership organisation. In Ireland we'd have the Irish Society of Chartered Physiotherapists, so they get their education course and then become member of the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. What we have essentially today is equivalent in strength and conditioning, these membership organisations like the UKSCA, like the NSCA in America, and also Dan Baker essentially involved in the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association, and those are excellent. I think they're going to add the final step for coaches before they then maybe get their experience, but they really need essentially a fundamental course to give them their education, so that they have clear theoretical understanding behind what they're doing. They have strong rationales about why they're delivering different intervention strategies, and then also then have those coaching skills. That's the ultimate thing, to have the coaching skills, whether it be it on the pitch, on the track, or on the gym, and that's fundamentally what our course does. And I recommend for coaches, once they get our course, they go on and get then their accreditation, be it with the UKSCA or the NSCA. And we get some coaches who are always asking me, Karl, are you in competition with the NSCA or the UKSCA? And I said, not at all, we're complementary. We're essentially an education course provider, they're a membership organisation, and we ultimately go hand in hand, a bit like the degree, the universities for physiotherapy versus the membership organisations.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting and quite right that you made that clear distinction, so people understand that it's not a clash, it's a working together and a collaboration, because ultimately these organisations want to best prepare yourselves or myself, so that when you do get an opportunity at a football club or a sporting institute, that you can have all the knowledge you need to be able to do a really good job, because sometimes you only get one opportunity and you want to make sure you take it when you get the opportunity.
Massively so, and if you think about it, a professional athlete's or even an amateur athlete's career is very, very short, and whether you're amateur or professional, you're looking to try and perform as best as you can. And the amount of athletes that I would have seen that were probably a little bit frustrated towards the end of their careers, because by the time maybe they've started work with myself or another elite level, Coach Mike McGuirin was on earlier, coaches like that, some of those athletes are a bit frustrated because they weren't getting that type of level of strength and conditioning support before, and what we want is best practice. So the likes of ourselves, the UKSCA, the NSCA, we're working together to try and get the highest level of standard, being delivered out there.
Exactly. So regarding the future, and I touched on it, so future courses, I suppose we can take it all different ways, but we're looking at a soccer one, and then we're looking at maybe doing a sport specific one, maybe in other different sports as well. So what's your thoughts on that, Karl?
Yeah, we've been fortunate enough to deliver the courses now throughout Europe and then also in Asia. Originally obviously started in Ireland, and then we moved to Poland, and we've been there for the last 5 years. UK, when we delivered in Brunel University for a few years, Czech Republic, Slovakia, we've been in China, UAE, and now we're starting in Romania next month, and then Lithuania then in June time. So we have a lot of countries that we're involved in. Obviously the NCSE course is running there, but we're also now looking alongside yourself, Mike, is to try and maybe deliver more sport-specific type seminars. And this is where we'll look at certain things that are contained within the course, apply to a sport like soccer in this case, so it's a soccer seminar, but then also add additional content in there which makes it very specific for soccer, like the research behind the needs analysis for soccer players, and then what type of specific strength and conditioning needs to be done. This course essentially gives you the fundamentals for all sport, but now how can you apply some of that content in here into a soccer specific seminar?
Well, it's certainly very exciting, and Karl, just tell the viewers the website where they can find out more about this information, and also the actual, the real course at the NCSC. Yeah,
so the website is Elite Performance Institute. You can find it at www.epicertification.com, and all the course dates, locations, everything is on that.
Brilliant, let's have a look at that, and definitely come on the courses. They're brilliant. I've been on them themselves, and these new ones which are coming up, again, they'll be really sport specific, and the soccer one, which I'm going to be a big part of, I hope to see you down there. So Karl, thank you very much for coming on the show. I always finish with 5 simple questions. It's nothing too deep, but first of all, who was the biggest mentor you've had over your career?
I suppose I always say it on my course as well. My first biggest influence, 2 people really. The first one would have been Vince Kelly in Australia for that year that I was there, because he really opened my eyes to what strength and conditioning was. And then the second biggest one is one of our shooters, Mike McGuirin, who currently delivers on the course. And Mike at the time was working with the national team, with O'Driscoll and Paul O'Connell and guys like that. And I was in with the club set up in Leinster, but also the Irish 19s. And I would have seen a lot of sessions that Mike would have delivered, and we spoke a lot. There was a few different county teams that we were both involved in, and during that time he would have also mentored me around the work with those county teams. So those 2 guys probably would be the biggest in terms of my formative years.
Very good, very good. What's one of your biggest regrets?
Good question. Probably not maybe doing my master's in strength and conditioning sooner. So I would have left it, after a number of years of working. And when I finished the IRFU, I decided then to do my master's. I think that really, and there's a very good guy there that headed the program back in St. Mary's. So I did my degree in St. Mary's, went back to St. Mary's for their master's. Now that master's in St. Mary's had only just started. I was the first cohort year of that particular master's program. So if I wanted to do my master's, I couldn't have done it in St. Mary's, it would have to have been somewhere else. But John Goodwin was the guy who was the director of that course. But maybe not doing my master's sooner, because after doing that master's, after the experience and everything that I had at that particular point, it really kind of shaped me a lot better as a strength and conditioning coach. So possibly I wish I had that shaping at a younger age. It was really by the time I hit 30, was when I would have had, that proper shaping for my ideology of how strength and conditioning should be.
Okay, very good. What would you say your biggest achievement is?
Probably the courses. I remember after, I think it might have been the second year of running the courses in Ireland, and I went up and I spoke with Mike about the courses for the following year and which ones I wanted him to be part of and so forth. And Mike, posed the question, listen, the last 2 years have been great, being very successful in Ireland, where do you see it going? And I said, well, the plan is by year 3 for the course to go international. And Mike started to giggle and laughed and says, you know, really, how do you think that's going to happen? And I said, I don't have an idea, I have no idea, but when there's a will, there's a way. So really to take the courses from where they started, just in my office, to where they are now today, I'd have to say, yeah, probably the growth of the courses.
And you've done that so well, and it's obviously in many countries, but just a name shout to a couple of your guys who are working out in Bart, isn't there, and the boys?
There's been really good coaches that have come through the program, are now working, you know, very successfully. You know, Bartek Bibrovich, one of our education managers for Poland, he's also our education manager for China. Bart, like very good coaches, you had to travel, you know, was willing to travel to further educate, so he came across to Dublin to do the course, and from there decided, listen, we need something like this in Poland. He was vice president of the Polish Strength and Conditioning Association, and then he said, can you bring it to Poland? So we did, and have a great relationship. And you know, the last few years Bart's now also been working over in China, working with the Chinese Olympic Committee, working mainly in sports like volleyball, table tennis, basketball, and has been very successful there for the last few years. So so Bart's done very well, and the great coach came from Italy again to Dublin for the course, Aristide Guerrero. He did the course and then had to get a certified strength and conditioning qualification in order to get a job, and that job was in New Zealand. So he did our course, got to New Zealand with the New Zealand Academy of Sport, was there for a few years, and then went on to Rio Olympics and worked with the Brazilian rugby team at the Rio Olympics, and is still in Brazil today working with them. And
that just proves the course will make a difference to people's lives, which is excellent. Question 4, what advice would you give to young up-and-coming sports scientists, strength and conditioning coaches? You know, they might be just starting the journey, or they might have just got their graduate degree. What advice would you give to these people?
Yeah, very good. You know, as we said, we get a number of different people coming on the course from different backgrounds, be it personal training, physiotherapy. You know, some don't actually want to go on as a strength and conditioning coach. They just want to get, you know, further knowledge so that they can apply principles of strength and conditioning, or others actually want to formulate a career for themselves. Either or, whichever one it is, I go and say, well, you need your education course first so that you can then get insurance to practice as a strength and conditioning coach, because everything, you know, and rightly so, has gone that way. You need your insurance, so they need to complete the course first of all so they can then go and practice as a strength and conditioning coach. But then they need to put it all into practice. You know, the physios relate to this straight away when I go and say, if you go and do a Mulligan course and you learn Mulligan mobilizations, the last thing you want to go do is go off and do another course. You need to now go back to your clinic and apply all of that to understand it better. So once they go and, you know, complete our course, it's experience. You know, they need to get experience, and for me there's no reason why you can't get experience in strength and conditioning, because a physio, they need a patient. A strength and conditioning coach, yeah, if you have a team or an athlete, great, but if you don't, you can do it on yourself. So they can just go and implement all the different sessions, the programs, the periodization, the structures, everything that we give them on the course straight into their own training. So for me, experience is essential.
Excellent answer, excellent answer. So the last one, I suppose, what's the future for yourself, the course, maybe just yourself? What aspirations have you got? Marriage and children? Or?
Yeah, well, I suppose we might have to shelve that for this year. But I think the courses, every year we like to add a couple of new countries, and if we can add a couple of new countries like this year, it's going to be Romania, Lithuania, possibly one more by the end of the year. We'll see, but I just enjoy delivering the course in new countries, meeting new people, different ways of thinking, but ultimately the message is always the same. You know, the big message is keep it simple. You know, a good friend and very highly decorated strength and conditioning coach, Ashley Jones, used to work with the New Zealand All Blacks. I had him and your father over in Dublin a few years ago for a high performance summit, and Ashley just had a great phrase for the guys. You know, if you want to get strong, lift big rocks. Now, it's not sometimes as simple as that, but the message was just keep it simple. You know, today too many coaches try to make things sexy for the sake of making it sexy, so they can be maybe a little bit different. I understand they're looking for retention reasons with their clients or their athletes, but if you have a clear system, you keep it simple, you understand what you're doing, and you're consistent in what you do, if you have all of that in place, you'll go very far.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I suppose me with you guys with the EPI, I think 7 years time the World Cup is in Canada, America and Mexico. You know, wouldn't it be great to be out coaching them countries? You know, that they got such a rich strength and conditioning background, but maybe not so much in soccer or football, and that's something maybe we could bring to that part of the world.
Definitely. You know, another good guy, Roman Svancher, who's involved in our Slovakian courses. I was at the Georgia-Ireland game just last night, and Roman gave me a couple of tickets for the game. Roman is a strength and conditioning coach with the Georgian soccer team, and you know, for him, he was essentially you know, managing those courses, but also then, you know, he's the head of S&C there, and you know, he's talking about soccer. There isn't really that much being covered in strength and conditioning knowledge-wise in countries like Georgia, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and so forth. So to create this new seminar with yourself, to bring it to those countries, I think it'd be great for the coaches there, and it'll be very rewarding for ourselves just to share that knowledge with those coaches.
Brilliant. Well, Karl, thank you very much for coming.
Pleasure.
Brilliant.